take that into that as the problem. So all this argument doesn't hold.
No, but what they are trying to look at is the consequence of that in a broader context. If
space as well as time, if we consider, is there a trade-off?
No, because
Space, we want to optimize the space part.
see, this is a one-time job. Okay, when you are trying to repeatedly do, then you have to think of space-time trade-off. Here there is no such thing. You are going to archive it, and one time you are going to analyze. So what you do is you take the tape, just scan through that once and get the frequency count. Once that frequency count is obtained, very easy to build the Huffman code, and once the Huffman code is done, then the coding scheme is built, and once the coding scheme is built, again in the second pass you just convert everything and now generate a compressed file, and a compressed file is going to be used for all future application, and therefore that is space optimized.
Or can we say that this could be, this coding scheme can be used based on the previous experience or the historical data?
No, we cannot, because it depends purely on the frequency. See,
Yeah,
if the frequency is different, then I may have to come up with a different scheme. So for a given frequency, how do I do the archiving effectively? That is what is answered in this, because there is no universal coding scheme that will be apt for optimizing all frequencies representation. This is a variable length code, so by definition the shorter ones I must use for more frequent ones, the longer ones I must use for less frequent ones. But this hassle is not there if it is an equal length code. I don't care whether A occurs 1 million time or 100 time. If it is 3 bits, A is allotted 3 bits, and whatever it is, B will be allotted 3 bits, C will be allotted 3 bits, and so on. So if the total number of characters is 1 million, and there I will have 3 million bits, period.
And what he is trying to say is,
For
we
given
have
file.
an historical this thing.
Yeah.
For example, English documents.
Yeah.
They have made a study on the character frequencies.
Hmm.
So you can a priori decide that this is the code that I use, and
Oh yes, you can do that. Definitely we can do that.
So in this case, we can have the space and time trade-off, what he is saying.
You don't have to rework again for the current frequency. If you generally know that this is how the frequency is, you can bet on one particular scheme that may or may not be optimal, but in general it will be better than the fixed length code. Definitely, yes. Right. The only limitation of the history based conclusion is the current pattern must agree with that history. If there is a deviation, then the scheme that you use may not work. For example, in your vast experience you found that roughly A is 45%, B is 25, B is 13%, D is 16%, and so on. You have got now a new file to archive. If the distribution of A, B, C, D is not significantly different from this, the scheme that you have used for this distribution you can use for your new file also. But if in the new file, right, A is much less used and B is used enormously, then what will happen is, you see that this 4 will become lot more. In other words, that scheme is not applicable for this file because the frequency in the new file that you have does not agree with your historic patterns. Okay? So that is the only thing you have to be cautious about. As long as that pattern is followed with minor variation, there is enough resilience here. You can adopt that.
For example, in the case of MPEG file format, they are using this Huffman coding. So that is a fixed one. That is for this particular code, RAID 1 they are using the same code.
Yeah.
So in that case, they are following the historical data.
Right.
There is a higher probability that the red color may appear more times as compared to the other colors.
See, in the context of continuously varying scenario, the difference between the previous and the next one is so little that the implication of the historic data on the current data, right, is very high because of the continuity. That is the reason why it doesn't break. See, the question is, you can apply Huffman code anyway for any pattern, or you can choose an Huffman code used for one frequency to yet another frequency, and then you can go ahead with that. Whether that is optimal or not is the only question. You won't go wrong if any prefix free code can be used to represent 6 numbers. I can use the same thing even if A is 10, B is 35, C is 25, D is 5 and stuffs like that. I can use the same code even for this frequency. Technically it will not be wrong. Only thing is whether it is using optimal number of bit pattern is the question. Right. That is all. It's only the optimality that is on debate. Here we showed that it is possible to code optimally if you use the Huffman code, provided we take the knowledge of the frequency also into consideration. When you could do it, it is possible to do substantially less number of bits. It is a coding scheme that will lead to compact representation. So this is what they call as a data compression. Instead of using a standard ASCII 8-bit representation, I can use this and then I get the same data represented in a compressed form.
If the frequency, just for interest, frequencies are equal.
Yeah.
What is the impact?
Look, no, if frequencies are equal, then the fixed code length and this one would remain the same. When the frequencies are equal, you are going to get a balanced binary tree. And for the balanced binary tree, all the leaves are on the last level or but one level above. Right. So there is no question of, there is no point in putting anything ahead of anybody in the equal frequency. So the Huffman tree, which you see here, will be a balanced tree. So all code words will have same length, which means the equal length code word is as good as Huffman code. If the frequencies are equal, equal code word length and Huffman code will give the same answer.
Okay, sir. If I want to access the 100th character in a file, then if we are doing this, I would have to go in sequence, right?
Yes.
That cannot be.
Yeah, that cannot be avoided. If it is an equal code word, you can straight away go to the 300th bit and then you know where exactly it is. Because it is independent of the characters.
So this is a disadvantage, right?
Yes, in variable length you cannot access a particular character in a particular position or a rank. That is a disadvantage of any variable length code. If it is varying, then you...
If it is prefix free,
No, whether it is prefix free or not, when it is varying, I do not know where my 100th character is. That depends on the sum total of the 99 characters that I have used, right? If the 99 characters total code length happens to be, let's say 243, then my 100th character starts at 244th bit. But if that happens to be 720, then it starts at 723rd bit. So I don't know where my 100th character is. But if it is equal length code word, I know that my 100th character is at 300. There is no question of anything confusing there. Independent of what is behind this. Independent of what is the first 99 characters are, my 100th character is at 300th bit position. But if it is varying, these first 99 characters may have varying length, so I don't know exactly where my... Yes.
but if I want to access a sequence of 10 characters, say, from any position in the middle of the file,
Even then,
then
this will not work.
This will not work, but if it is not a prefix free code, if it has a prefix, then I can,
Prefix free code is necessary to code and decode. But if you want that number like 100, getting 10 numbers, those kind of things cannot be done efficiently in this. You have to work for it. It's not that it is impossible to do. Only thing is it is laborious to do. You do not know where the 100th character starts. Suppose if you want to I want to access the 100th, from 100th character to 110th character I want to access. It is very simple in the fixed length code. Retrieve everything from 300th bit to 330th bit, you have that with you. But here you do not know. You have to first locate where the 100th character is, and after accessing that, again you cannot simply pull out 30 further bits. You have to see how, what it takes to get the next 30 bits sequentially and then get that bit bunch. Right? So that's what you have to do here. So what we are trying to do here is, as he was mentioning, archiving. It is not going to be used for any manipulation. That will be done on the file which is representing the characters. It is not going to be done on the compressed data. Compressed data is used only for archiving purposes. Compressed and encrypted data will not be used directly in any application. Okay? You take your credit card, you swipe it, the number goes to the server, but it goes in an encrypted fashion so that others cannot eavesdrop and then pull the data related to your credit information or the card information and so on. But it doesn't work with that encrypted one. There is a decryptor, and that only does all those things. So the same way, compressed data cannot be simply be used directly. It has to be decompressed. All we can say is that as long as the compressed and compressing algorithm or coding and decoding algorithms are simple, I would bet on this scheme, because I have to store terabytes of information, right? 25% of saving in a terabyte of information is a significant saving for me. So I will use this code and archive it. So this is only for archival purposes and not for manipulation. That is the reason why, although I have answered your question, they are not relevant for our consideration, mainly because this is not going to be used for manipulation. No compressed data will be directly used for manipulation. Even in real time, even JPEG or whatever is, you simply throw the bit pattern of the compressed file, you won't see anything on the screen. It has to be decompressed, and that only you can see as a picture, meaningful picture. But compressed data is used to increase the bandwidth utilization or communicate the volume, all those things. So there will be a compressor which will compress and send so that more pictures can be sent. But at the other end, it has to be decompressed, and then only you can see them as a meaningful picture. Okay? In between, we are not going to do any accessing of pictures. So let me quickly explain about dynamic programming. So dynamic programming is again a technique for optimization problem. So there are several interesting points and features I would like to explain through this case study. Okay. One is at the algorithm design level, another is at the fine tuning, code fine tuning level. Okay. Dynamic programming is more appropriate in a context where we have expressed the solution of a problem in terms of the solution of subproblems. Okay. This is what we did for decremental design. This is what we have done for divide and conquer also, and this is what we are going to do even here, dynamic programming. You are going to express the solution of a problem in terms of the solution of the subproblem, but these subproblems may overlap. In other words, I am going to take you to the most general form. They are called overlapping subproblems. In divide and conquer, you split the input into two disjoint parts. Think of merge sort. Merge first half, merge second half, then you are putting together. So I have expressed the solution of a problem to the solution of two subproblems, but they are disjoint. In decremental design, you have related a solution of problem to a solution of a subproblem, but there is only one subproblem there. Therefore, the recursion looked like a chain. In divide and conquer, it looked like a tree. Okay? Here also, you have some, if you look into the subproblems and all, it will be a multiple spawning. It is a tree structure, but then there are heavy overlaps here. And because of the heavy overlap, if you directly run the recursive formulation into a recursive code, you will run into phenomenal problem. One simple example will illustrate that point. Okay? My favorite example is computing the Fibonacci numbers. Fibonacci numbers are given by f of n equal to f of n minus 1 plus f of n minus 2 and f of 1 equal to 1, f of 0 equal to 0. Okay? You can write a straightforward recursive program based on this. In fact, immediately after teaching factorial, probably they will teach this and then everybody will write a recursive program for it. What is disastrous about that recursive program? It is something which nobody will be able to run and then make anything meaningful. Why? You look into the recursion tree. If you take, let us say, 6 will trigger a call on 5 and 4, and 5 will trigger a call on 4 and 3, 4 in turn will 3 and 2, 3 in turn 2 and 1, 2, 1 and 0, and this 2 again 1 and 0, because this will return the value, and then this 3 will trigger a call on 2 and 1 will return a value, but this t 1 and 0, then this will return 3, and then this call again 4 will make a call for 3 and 2, 3 will make a call on 2 and 1, 2 will make a call on 1 and 0. This is the recursion tree. Now you can see how many recursive calls are made. Just fib 6 you make, and the number of recursive calls made, okay, are in fact much more than the value fib 6, right? In fact, this is going to make exponentially many recursive calls. If the number of recursive calls made here is tn minus 1, and if it is tn minus 2 plus one more recursive call, therefore the number of recursive calls made will be much more than even the Fibonacci numbers, which is an exponentially many recursive calls. Why so many calls are made? The reason why so many calls are made is what is known as repeating the computation of common sub problem. Common or overlapping sub problem. Take for example, how many times F3 is computed in this scenario? You have computed here already, but when this recursive call returns and make this, again you keep on computing it, and then again this returns, but on behalf of this, when you make another recursive call, every time it is computed. And look at the way in which F2 is computed. In so many places, F2 is computed by triggering further the recursive calls and other things. In other words, you have completely forgotten and ignored the fact that you have computed this, and every time when you want to compute f of 2, you make fresh recursive calls, get that value and return it to the calling environment, and this is a tremendous overhead, phenomenal overhead. In other words, if you consider the following code, this miserable thing will happen. Just from the recursive formulation, you go directly to a recursive code. Okay, fib n. Okay, if n equal to 0 or 1, okay, or 1, return n. That is, if n equal to 0, you are returning 0. If n equal to 1, you are returning 1. Else, okay, else what you do, temp equal to, well, you can write straight away, there is no need for temp and all. Name of the function on the left hand side, fib n minus 1, n minus 2, return fib. This is the code that you have used, and when you have expanded, this is what has happened. That is because on behalf of fib n minus 1, you do lot of things and you return the value, and when you are trying to do on behalf of fn minus 2, again you are doing everything. For example, for 5, on behalf of 5, you have computed down the line something. In fact, even f of fib 4 was also computed and returned. But when fib 5 returns the value, and when you make a fresh recursive call, everything that is done before is forgotten, and now again you make another recursive call, as if you don't know fib 4 before, you start computing this, and on that, in that situation again you compute f3 by triggering further the recursive calls and so on. And that is the reason why the number of recursive calls in this are exponential. Phenomenally inefficient code. From the recursive formulation, I have written a straightforward recursive program, and this is worst nightmare. You run this for 20 and see what happens. You run this for 30, you see whether you ever get an answer. Right?
Assignment to trainees.
Yeah.
Asking them to implement the iterate to and the recursive.
Right.
Beyond 30 or 37 to be precise.
It won't work. It just doesn't work at all. The reason is you are repeatedly doing common sub problem. That is the reason. Now, how do we avoid it? What is the way to avoid? If you have done once something, and if you can store that value, and if you can retrieve for your future, right, then you need not, you can save lot of time. In the parlance of operating system, it is well known, caching. You do, in order to minimize the disk access, you just store them with the hope that what you need next, if it is available in cache, you can access it along the fast channel rather than making a slow disk access. Okay. One thing you can do, you need not operate any cache, and whenever you want, you access it and then throw it back, and whenever you, that is equivalent to doing again and again and again, and that is going to cause enormous amount of delay. When you know that even next for a few more occasions it is needed, why should you throw it back into the disk? Okay. And this is also called as time-space trade-off. You now create additional memory locations where you store the values, and when you store the values, okay, you can access them and you can use it. So make a recursive call only if necessary. If it is already computed, don't trigger further recursive calls. And the technique is called memoization. Memoization means, memo is a word that is used to remind people in a small chit where the reminder would reach you. Okay. Memoization is a technique in which additional space will be created so that I avoid recomputation. So what I am going to do is, I will have the following, I want fib n, but I will have, let us say, f0, f1, f2, etc. fn. Initially this is 0, this is 0, this is 1. Everything else is, let's say, -1, etc., -1, which means those values are not computed yet. I have never computed these values so far. This is the initial configuration. So before this, I will have an F array which is initialized like this. After this, what I do is, whenever I compute a fresh fib value, I record it there, and if it is not, then I proceed further. So what I do is, okay, if n equal to 1 or -1, you return instead of this. If f of n, this is an array, I will use this, okay, this is an array location, this is not a problem. If f of n, this is not the function call kind of a thing. If f of n is not equal to -1, then return f of n. Else f of n equal to fib n minus 1. Fib is still the name of the recursive function. F of n, then return f of n. So I am going to return the array values, but that array value itself is computed through recursive calls, okay, only if it is not computed. Okay. If it is already computed, I know that it will not be equal to -1, so I would return it immediately. So I am going to return a value immediately, or I am going to do something depending on it is computed already or not. Now I have changed very little in my original code. This is called the memoized version. Okay. Now you see the recursion tree for this memoized version. Same recursion tree. You take 6. Is F6 not equal to -1? No, it is -1. F6. Let me write this. F2, F3, F4, F5, F6, all are -1. Is F6 not equal to? No. So you come here. I am going to trigger F5. Fib 5 will be triggered. Is F5 not equal to -1? No, it is -1. So I am going to trigger 4. And again I am going to trigger 3. And I am going to trigger 2. And again, is F2 is not equal? No, it is equal to -1. So I am going to trigger. This is fib n minus 1, which is 1. I am going to trigger 1. But if f of 1 is not equal to -1, yes, it is not equal to -1. Therefore, I am going to return this value. So I am going to return the value 1, whatever is in that place. I am going to return the value 1 there. And here I am going to 0, and then I am going to return the value 0 here. So when I have these two values returned, f of 2 is now computed as 0 plus 1 as 1. So now f of 2 is not -1 anymore, it is plus 1 here, and now f of 2 will return 1 back here to f of 3, and in f of 3 you triggered f of 2 and then you are going to trigger f of 1, but f of 1 will return 1 immediately, and because 1 and 1 is available, 2 will be computed in f of 3. and it will be stored in f of 3. So f of 3 will compute 2 here and 2 will be returned here, and when 2 is returned, f of 4 is going to make another call now, and the another call will be f of 2, fib2. Now see what happens for fib2. Run the fib2. Fib2, if f of 2 not equal to minus 1, yes, f of 2 is not equal to minus 1 here. So return that value. In other words, I am going to return the value 1 here, which is going to return 3. So it will compute the value 3, and then it will return 3 there. And for 5, on behalf of 5, you call the f of 4, and now you are going to call f of 3, but this 3 is not going to make further recursive call, because in fib3, f3 not equal to minus 1, so it is going to return that value. In other words, 2 will be immediately returned, no further call will be, whereas fib3 here has triggered recursive call, fib3 here returned the value immediately. I computed once, I have stored that value, and I am simply returning it. So 3 plus 2 is 5. So f of 5 will be made into 5, and you are going to return this value here, and now f of 6 will make another call, fib 6 will make another call for fib 4. Fib 4, if f of 4 is not equal to minus 1, yes, f of 4 is not minus 1, return that f of 4, which means 3 will be returned, and it will compute, first it will store in f of 6 as 8, and it will return 8 to the calling environment. Look at this tree, look at this one, and look at this. Okay, dramatic difference from exponential to linear in one jump you got, thanks to the memoization. All I have done is I have used an auxiliary array, and once I have used the auxiliary array, used the same structure, same recursive program, same recursive formulation, except that I have tinkered it little bit by adding the memoization, and then you see the great benefit. Where does the benefit come from? The benefit comes from the fact that when I have a common sub problem, that sub problem is computed once and only once, and it is not repeated. Why this technique is not even thought of in divide and conquer? In divide and conquer, you split the input into disjoint parts. So there is no common sub problem. So there is no question of memoization or trying to, you can store the solution of the sub problem, but that is not going to be used again at all, because every sub problem is a new fresh sub problem. Here it was not like that. F of 3 is needed here and here again and here again and so on. So in several places they are needed that if you simply follow the recursion, you end up phenomenal overhead. You end up with phenomenal overhead. Okay. So this simple problem should suggest that it is important that we store the solution of the sub problems by computing once and only once, and later on whenever you need it, look at the table and use that value rather than recompute the solution again. Okay. This is the wisdom we have got here, and this is the wisdom that Richard Bellman got way back 50 years when he was solving lot of optimization problem for the World War scenario. Plenty of optimization problems have to be solved in those contexts, and it is a technique introduced by Richard Bellman. It is nothing but a tabular method for solving the computational problem. Dynamic programming means, in fact programming doesn't mean the computer programming. Remember, this technique was invented well before even the first digital computer was ever even manufactured. Okay. So here the term programming means a step-by-step computation that you would do, right? A tabular method. What is the dynamic programming? What is dynamic about it? You see how I build the table on the fly. As I do the computation, I am building the table. So what do I put in the table? Solutions of the sub-problems. So dynamic programming is a strategy where you build the solutions of the sub-problems and store it in a table, okay, and use it whenever those sub-problems and their solutions are needed at a later point. Thereby you would avoid recomputation of the solutions of sub-problems. Okay. In general, every recursive formulation will attempt to express the solution of a problem in terms of solution of sub-problems, right? But how many times you are going to consider the solutions of the sub-problems? If they are all disjoint, you will consider them once and only once. But if they are overlapping, then the common sub-problems will be considered every time its super problem requires a solution. That means there are going to be certain sub-problems which will be recomputed again and again and again. So a blind recursive code from the recursive formulation will be disastrous. Therefore, enhance that with memoization and build the table, okay, you get significant saving of time. So you use more space and reduce the time. Earlier I didn't store any of these information, but I end up doing repeatedly that computation. So store it, I save there something, time space trade-off. Okay. So this is a simple illustration which will clarify all the foundations of or basics of dynamic programming. But the formal application of dynamic programming in a non-trivial context requires little more elaboration than this. So we will examine that with another simple and interesting case study.
Greedy approach is also used in optimization.
Yes.
And greedy approach assures local optimum but not necessarily global.
Global optimum.
And what is the scenario in dynamic programming?
Okay. For the dynamic programming, what we have to, I will explain it with respect to the table. Okay. When I build the table, we will know. In fact, if a greedy solution is working, suppose greedy solution is working, how does the greedy algorithm proceed? It proceeds in stages and it keeps building the solutions. In other words, optimal subsolutions are extended to optimal larger subsolutions and so on, and you go in one stroke from smallest to largest. In other words, there is only one chain of subproblems which lead to the optimal solution of the given problem. If such a chain is not there, or if it is not going to work, then you have to combine several subproblems and their solutions to arrive at the solution of your given problem. That is when the greedy would fail, because it is considering only one way of doing it, and dynamic programming will be successful. And dynamic programming is always a correct solution. This form of solving a problem leads always to a correct solution. Whether it is efficient or not is a different debate. It is a solution that will work. Like incremental solution or a strategy, it is a strategy that will produce an answer without fail. Okay. In incremental strategy, you increment one by one. Probably one style of incrementing could be nasty and another style of incrementing could be efficient. Both of them anyway will give the answer. But you may have to be very clever in what to choose next. That's a different issue altogether. But as a strategy, it always gives the correct answer. Similarly, dynamic programming will always produce a correct answer. So we have to be very clever about this. Now, let us look into the major ingredients of dynamic programming in the light of what we have discussed so far. The first starting point is, okay, obtain recursive formulation of optimization problem. Okay, this is the first thing that you have to do. Whatever is the optimization problem that is given, obtain a recursive formulation of the solution. Once the recursive formulation is available, well, if it is completely made up of disjoint problems, then you don't have to worry about it. In fact, the divide and conquer based solution is a recursive formulation of the solution, but they are made up of disjoint subproblems. Okay. From this recursive formulation, you can identify the subproblem space, that is the set of all subproblems that you would ever encounter in the solving process, set of all possible subproblems that you would encounter if you implement this recursion. That identifies the subproblem space. Anyway, you have to produce the solutions for all these subproblems. Then only you will be able to solve the given problem. You cannot find f of 6 without finding f of 4 and f of 3. How you find f of 3 and f of 4 is a different matter. Whether you are using memoization or iteration, that is a different matter. But without f of 4 and f of 3, you cannot find f of 5. And to find f of 4, you need f of 3 and f of 2. So like this, by looking into the recursive formulation, we can identify the set of all subproblems whose solutions you would ever require to produce the solution of the given problem. That defines the subproblem space. The third thing is, among the subproblems, find the dependency relation or the order in which the solutions of the subproblems are to be obtained. Okay, that is given by dependency relation. Identify the dependency, how they are depending on each other. This will tell me the common subproblems, and if I want to avoid the subproblem to be repeatedly computed, what should I do? I should solve the subproblem first and then come to the super problem later. If I do that, then obviously I will avoid recomputing again and again. Therefore, this dependency relation will tell you the order in which solutions of subproblems are to be obtained. This will tell you in what order you have to do. When you know the order, then you don't have to repeat the computation. That is the important point. That is a key point. Which then the fourth one, build the solution in that order and obtain the final answer, and this you can achieve iteratively or recursively, that doesn't matter. Then execute all these things. So this is the analysis. This is the problem study part of it. You take a look at the problem, study the properties and do everything, and then freeze on these details. Based on this, now you can build the solution. The program can be written, algorithm can be worked out, everything can be done, because you, without even knowing what are all the subproblems involved, in what order you have to solve them, without deciding this, you can't think of an algorithm first. So you should get a full grasp on this detail, and once you have them, then you can develop the algorithm in line with the observation done in these 3 stages. That is the key. Okay. Now I can take a case study, but that will take about 15 to 20 minutes, and if I do that, well, I can do that, but if I do that, that will eat a little bit into your time on NP completeness. What do you suggest? Should I go ahead with the case study, or should I go for NP completeness? Huh? You want both? Okay, one both, and people who listen to me already, they want to go to NP completeness.
So small doubt here.
Yeah.
For this dynamic program, we want the problem to be overlapping one or non-overlapping one?
Overlapping.
Always.
Yes. No, for non-overlapping one, this strategy will not give you any benefit.
So it's by default, if we have the non-overlapping problem, it means that it's a dynamic program itself.
Divide and conquer.
Not divide and conquer.
Okay.
Right?
If we have the overlapping problems, then this strategy may lead to the better solution.
Yes. If there is no overlap among the subproblems, then going from the recursive formulation directly into the recursive code is not going to lead to computational penalty. It doesn't cause any computational overhead. Therefore, you can directly implement it. That is the reason why for divide and conquer based solutions, we have made a recursive formulation and immediately we wrote a recursive program based on it. That didn't lead us to anything dangerous. Whereas in the Fibonacci numbers, from the recursive formulation, the moment you went to a recursive program, you got into a problem. Alright? That is mainly because of the overlap.
Professor, all the time you are discussing about the dynamic and dynamic, but I feel that there should be a link between greedy and dynamic. So when we compare the problem that can be solved in greedy and as well as dynamic, how do you differentiate now?
Well, that's a very deep question. There are some satisfactory answers for that. If you look at Corman, he gives you a very brief discussion about it. It is an extremely subtle situation that, as far as the greedy is concerned with, we have a class of problems that can be effectively solved using the technique. If the underlying structure of the problem has got certain properties, then greedy will work. If it lacks, then the greedy will not work. We have some such characterization. Okay? Those structures are called matroids. The theory of matroids is discussed in Corman in the same chapter as the greedy algorithm, and it will be discussed under the banner Theoretical Foundations of Greedy Methods. It's a deep one. Okay? If the underlying structure is a matroid, then the greedy strategy will work. Otherwise, greedy will not work. This is a way to distinguish. But then, that is not the way we are going to use it in practice. When an optimization problem is given, we are not going to start thinking, does the underlying structure here, is there any matroidic structure visible here and all? We are not going to see, because that is mathematically very complicated to see. But we have a purely theoretical and mathematical result available on when this technique will work and when this is not going to work. We have a mathematically rigorous answer available for it. But algorithmically, that is not that useful. So we try greedy and see whether we are able to prove that the greedy works. When we are able to show that the greedy doesn't work by counterexample or by some means like this, see, the coin change problem, I have proved that the greedy doesn't work without even telling you whether it is a failing some matroidal property or not. I could have shown that in two ways. One way is that there is a mathematical condition needed and that mathematical condition is not satisfied, therefore greedy won't work. Another way is show for 65, look, greedy doesn't work, therefore it is convincing. Alright? So, it's a little subtle and it's very deep. That's the reason why we don't take course to that. But if you are interested in the research in algorithms, you have to plow through those things and then get to know a lot of advanced details related to it. Okay, matroids, greedioids, and then the structural properties of them and challenging questions, open problems, etc. are there. It's a different line altogether. But I have already made a comment on how the greedy and dynamic programming are related in a different perspective. By looking into you can view this as again a solution of subproblem being extended to solution of subproblem. The greedy takes only one chain of building up, and dynamic programming, we are going to see, is exploring multivarious paths and combines various sub-solutions and trying to build the solution, optimal solution of the given problem. So the manner in which the optimal solution of the given problem is built fundamentally varies from greedy to dynamic programming. Dynamic programming tries to combine several sub-solutions in various ways and tries to build the optimal solution. Greedy approach, on the other hand, simply tries to extend one optimal solution to another one and then tries to hit it. That's the reason why it may fail. Okay? So we can see that once I give the example or the case study in which okay. Now I'm not sure whether is the lectures that I gave in Bangalore available here for people to refer, see, or something like that. If that is the case, I have discussed already this. You can look at the videotape, and then there I have completely worked out this on matrix multiplication. I have worked out in full detail there, right?
We can make it available.
Then I think what I would suggest is,
Yeah, I mean it's.
it is videotaped, I know that.
I know that, but only thing is probably it may take another 1 week or 10 days after that. Probably.
No, what I thought was, instead of repeating the same thing here, it's the same case study, so in the board and in the recording, etc., it would be a repeat of that, which I can avoid if you can refer to it. Okay? So, other lecture. Please refer to that, and if you have any difficulty, you let me know. Or what I can do is, in another scenario, I can take 2 or 3 case studies and then give detailed discussion on each one of them, and you can pick whichever one you want to understand the dynamic programming paradigm, and you can apply it in a context. This dynamic programming is used in several applications, the string edit distances and geometric problems, variety of contexts. This is used, spelling checkers, and identifying the closest word in the dictionary to the word that you have typed. Okay, all this, most of the word processors, they give you some guess list, right? Suppose you have typed a word wrongly, some spelling mistake, if you commit, then it outputs several closest words. How do you identify for a given word the list of words which are closest to it in the dictionary that is stored in the system? Dynamic programming is the key method that is used. It's a practical tool that is used in variety of software that is available. Okay, so let me now discuss about NP completeness and give you some ideas on them. So first of all, you have problems, and these problems can be categorized into solvable and unsolvable problems. Unsolvable means no matter how powerful your digital computer is, no matter how clever you are, whatever it is, it is impossible to obtain a solution for that problem. Okay, that is unsolvable. You can make a meaningful statement, you can read, you can understand, you will know what that problem is, but then you just cannot solve it. That is it. You can understand mathematically, you can even explain with notation and everything, okay, but it will not be, you cannot solve it. It's impossible to solve. So this is unsolvable. And rest of them is solvable. Do you know, by the way, any unsolvable problem? Example of unsolvable problem?
Checking for any infinite loop in a program.
0 by 0.
0 by 0? That is computation.
Checking for infinite loop in a program.
Checking for infinite loop in a program. Yes. What is it called?
Halting problem.
Halting problem. Then?
Traveling salesman problem.
No, traveling salesman problem we can solve.
If the number of days are more.
Yeah. We can still take, you need only more time, but it is finite. It is solvable. Halting problem is one. Another one.
The Euler line.
Huh?
Euler line.
What is that? So there is a joke about a boy who confronted a similar question. He was asked to give an example of an animal which lives both in water and land. He asked a frog. He answered frog. Teacher again asked, give me one more example. One more frog. So halting problem of one program, halting problem of another program. Right? Okay, I will tell you, it is in the context of context-free grammars. Now, can you tell me which is that which you cannot solve?
One grammar is a subset of another.
No, that is solvable.
Whether there exists any solution for the given problem.
No. Now in context-free grammars.
To check if a pattern power n is accepted by the.
Oh, it's solvable. Context-free parsing is it is solvable in polynomial time. You can transfer it to a standard form and you can use CYK algorithm for parsing. So, given the membership problem for context-free languages is solvable. In fact, even for Turing, whether it is there or not, it may take exponential amount of time. I am not saying.
Is it equivalence of two CFDs?
It is equivalence with something. Right. So all of you are undergraduate in computer science, right? No, not all of you are in UG in computer science. Okay.
No, for example, if you have some
Ambiguity of context-free grammar. That is a famous. In fact, disambiguating is the worst part of your parsing, isn't it? And why it is so bad, and why you have to introduce so many conventions, and then you have to go by case, etc. The main reason is that, okay, ambiguity resolving is undecidable, even for context-free grammars. Okay, it is not possible to. You can't design a Turing machine which terminates or guaranteed to terminate in finite amount of time. I am not qualifying polynomial or exponential or nothing. Just okay. So we have you heard about post correspondence problem, PCP, busy beaver problem? These are all examples of problems which are well formulated, you can state everything, you can mathematically